Hey guys, Joan Ribs here coming at you with another Spireside chat. Um, I always have loved doing Spireside chats to talk in detail about things that I don't feel like I can address when they come up on my Twitch channel, and something about doing a few more of them that address frequently asked questions that I hear on Twitch, which I really want to give a good answer to, but I just hear them often enough and the answer's long enough that I can't really do that. So today I want to talk about perfect play and what it means to have a seed and slay the Spire, and how it affects how you should be playing and stuff like that. Because I often get asked, do you think there's a seed that can't be beaten? Or shouldn't you have not gone to that store because opening it saw some relics and now you can't get those relics anymore even though you didn't have enough gold to buy them, or something like that. And this goes back to this idea of being a perfect player in a world where the game has seeded RNG. So I'm gonna take you the wrong direction for a second here and talk about poker, just to sort of lay the groundwork for two types of players I'm gonna be talking about in Slay the Spire. Perfect play in poker it's underdefined. If you talk about a perfect poker player, a poker player who's listening to you isn't going to actually know exactly what you mean, because there are two sort of main standout types of perfect player in poker. The first one is an optimal player. I'm just gonna explain the optimal player a second. The the other one is a nemesis player. So a nemesis player, if you were playing against a nemesis player, they would just always do the thing that beat you the hardest possible. If you bluffed, they would call. If you had it, they would fold. If you were holding cards and you're thinking, geez, I'm gonna fold these, I think, they would bluff every time. If you were holding cards which were slightly worse than theirs and you were gonna call them down, they would bet as much as you would ever call down. A nemesis player is going to beat you as hard as possible, as fast as possible. And nemesis players, there's an assumption that they know things that they shouldn't really be able to know. So there's some distance you can get in poker with like having reads on players and psychology and maybe a history with a player, so you understand some of the things they do in the game that aren't great. But it's not actually reasonable for an opposing player to know exactly which cards you are, or know exactly how much money you're going to call off with your hand that's slightly worse than theirs, or stuff like that. This is not actually reasonable in the real world for you to play against a nemesis player. And another, let's talk about optimal players now. So an optimal player, if you sat across from an optimal player and played against them, they would not beat you as hard as a nemesis player would. However, an optimal player is absolutely impossible for anyone to beat. So say that there's some nemesis player for me, and they're making the biggest possible bets that I'll call off with a slightly worse hand, but then I work it out. I realize, oh, this person always bets exactly as much as I would call when they want me to call. I'll just fold when they bet that much now, and I'll never call anymore. And against this nemesis player, we're now in something some people refer to as a leveling war, where like they know that I know that they know that I know, and it all gets very, very messy and stuff. And that's how playing against a nemesis player sort of goes. And sometimes you could actually end up beating a nemesis player pretty hard if you adjusted how you were playing your game. Or if the nemesis player goes and plays somebody else and tries to use a strategy that they're using against you, it doesn't work at all. It's not a strategy for poker in general, it's a strategy for beating you. An optimal player is absolutely unbeatable by anybody 1v1 though. When an optimal player bets, there's no possible way for you to know if they're bluffing or if they have it, because sometimes they are bluffing and sometimes they have it, and they know the right frequencies to do those two things in. If an optimal player makes a particular bet size, there's no way for you to know if they want you to call or fold. And beyond that, even within the confines of the game, they're going to be betting the right amount to give you a rough price to be calling off with your value hands, or rope you into maybe trying to bluff catch with some of your worse hands. An optimal player is something that's a little bit more reasonable to aspire to in any environment. And these are the two main types of perfect from poker, and successful poker players generally take elements of both to incorporate in their game. If they're playing at a new table and they don't know everybody, a perfect human poker player is going to understand optimal poker play as much as humans are really capable of understanding it. No Limit Hold'em is not yet fully solved, so we don't know everything about it, but we know a lot of things about it, and we can make plays which are pretty good and pretty close to unbeatable. And a perfect human player is also going to be trying to be a nemesis if they detect that something's off about what you're doing. Like they get a read that you're always bluffing if you do a certain thing, all of a sudden they're going to be calling. And that can lead to some sorts of leveling games and things that get weird with Nemesis players, but they're going to be pretty good at it. They've got a lot of experience playing poker at a high level. If you're a casual poker player or whatever, you're going to get absolutely trounced by this person. So when people ask me, like, if they should get into poker and stuff, for you to succeed at high-level poker, you need to be beating somebody who, one, understands a lot of how to play the game at an optimal level, like, be actually unbeatable by anybody, and two, has thousands, maybe tens of thousands of hours experience learning how to be a nemesis for other players and beating other players and leveling wars and the like. And these poker players are very hard to beat. And this is optimal in Nemesis in poker. So I played poker for a long time professionally, and that's where my brain is sort of starting. That's why I introduced the optimal and Nemesis player to you. And I want to bring it back to Spire and explain why sometimes it's hard for me to answer these questions. You have Nemesis and optimal players in Spire too. So a Nemesis player in Slay the Spire would know everything about the RNG of the seed. In Slay the Spire, when you start a game, you can either choose a seed or you just get given a seed randomly. And theoretically, you can look at the source code of the game and work out exactly how to play that seed and know things which you shouldn't be able to know about the seed. If you Google Forgotten Arbiter's 4,000 score Ironclad run, you'll see a run where Forgotten Arbiter spent a lot of time first looking through all the seeds, well, not quite all the seeds, but looking through millions and millions of the seeds in the game, looking for a run where he could get a very, very, very high score, and then once he found a seed that met the conditions that he was interested in, he sat and mapped it out. He looked at every fight, every card reward, all the pathing and stuff, and worked out exactly which way he was meant to go, how he was going to play different fights to, get enough max HP to get the score bonus for that, to get perfect elite fights to get the score bonus for that, to get enough curses to get the score bonus for curses, to never take a rare card so he got the score bonus for not having a rare card. This is a very, very, very impressive run, and I think it's an example of close to perfect Nemesis play in Slay the Spire. But of course, it's impossible to actually be a Nemesis player in Slay the Spire when you don't know what's in the seed of the game. If you haven't looked at the RNG for this seed, then you're not going to... It's really bugging me that those are... Okay, we're better. then you're not going to be able to do things like, oh, this turn I'll play these cards because I know that next turn I'm drawing these other cards. Even though there are 20 total cards in my deck, I know exactly which 5 I'll draw. You can't do stuff like that. So when I play Slay the Spire, I'm trying to be an optimal Slay the Spire player, which means I don't know exactly what this run of Slay the Spire holds in store for me or whatever, but an optimal Slay the Spire player is going to win as many runs as possible given that they do not know what the RNG of the seed is. So when I make a play, when I, for example, choose to go to an elite fight knowing that I'll die to Gremlin Knob and beat the other 2 elites, 2/3 of the time I'll be good, and knowing that 2/3 of the time that I'll be good is more valuable than anything I can find on the other paths in the act. If it turns out to be Gremlin Knob and I die, that doesn't mean that I made a mistake from the standpoint of an optimal player. It means that, when the optimal player makes the best plays that they can make, they lose the game a lot. Playing on Ascension 20, going for Act 4 heart kills, I'm losing more than half the time easily. And I don't think it's reasonable right now with the difficulty of the game where it's set for any optimal player to win more than half the time. So when I make these plays that I think are right, and often they are right, sometimes they're wrong, but often they are right, I still lose most of the time. An optimal player is different from a Nemesis player in a few ways. And so when somebody asks me questions that are about a Nemesis player, it's weird for me to answer them. I have to start with like, well, that doesn't have any relevance to my life. Let's look at some examples of how a Nemesis player is different from an optimal player. If you go to like a match and keep event, like where the gremlin has 12 face down cards, a Nemesis player knows exactly where the cards are. An optimal player doesn't. So that actually like changes the value of floors. All of a sudden a Nemesis player gets more value out of events than an optimal player does. Weird. Similarly, a Nemesis player knows exactly the order of cards that they're drawing in a hallway fight, which means that they don't take as much damage in hallway fights, so it's more valuable to take hallway fights. Weird. You could say the same about elites and bosses. Nemesis players going to know whether taking a certain amount of elites in a run gives them the best relics that they need to get the highest score, whereas an optimal player won't. So a Nemesis player can be like, well, yeah, I'm not going to bother taking an elite here because it doesn't actually, give me the thing that I want, and maybe it takes me some damage, which stops me from winning later. Whereas an optimal player has to sit there and be like, well, I know that I need more relics to win the run. The easiest way is to take this elite fight. And, they take an elite fight where it happens to be the one elite that's hardest for their deck to beat, and so they take a ton of damage or lose right there, and then even if they win, they get like a blue candle and it doesn't have any relevance to their run. But the optimal player didn't make a mistake there, and neither did the Nemesis player, even though they came up with different ideas, because the idea of what's right to do for an optimal and Nemesis player is different, because they have different information about the game. Yeah, so an optimal player can't do things the Nemesis player does. Optimal players will rightly make plays which a Nemesis player would see as a mistake, and a Nemesis player will regularly make plays which would seem like a mistake to an optimal player as well. And that's a really good point. If you know, that's a really important point to stress. Yeah, Steve, you made such a great point there. If you know the contents of the seed RNG, you're gonna do things which just look really stupid and dumb to somebody who doesn't. Like, in Forgotten Arbiter's 4,000 point Ironclad run, he just starts taking 4-ofs of terrible cards, and the reason is that he gets a collector bonus for having 4 copies of the same card at the end of the run. But if you were an optimal player, taking 4 copies of this bad card, which is not good at all, would not be something that you'd do, because you wouldn't know that you were able to win all the fights no trouble despite doing it, and you wouldn't know which of the bad cards you were going to be offered 4 of over the course of the run. So, you take, all the copies of this bad card, and then you only get 3 of them. It's pretty awkward. They're very different players. So, bringing this all the way back to why I wanted to make this video, I get asked a lot of the time in my channel questions which are for a Nemesis player. I get asked, if you replayed that seed, do you think you could win it? And that's sort of an interesting question, and it's one that I can think about and try to answer, but that's not a world that I live in. I don't replay seeds on stream. If I were to replay a seed where I knew some of the RNG from having played it already, I could probably do slightly better, but that's not a person that I'm interested in trying to be good at being. I'm not trying to be someone who, can win Slay the Spire runs the second time he tries them. I'm not trying to be someone who can win Slay the Spire fights the second time he tries them. That's not who I'm trying to be as a Slay the Spire player. I also get asked things about game balance, which are addressed to a Nemesis player rather than an optimal player. I get asked things like, do you think that there should be seeds which are impossible to beat? And the answer is I absolutely don't care, because when I play a run, I don't know what the seed is. And that's not who I am. That doesn't matter to me at all. I get asked questions like, shouldn't you have done this? looking at what happened. And sometimes that's like, sometimes there's some validity to that, but a lot of the time it's somebody not understanding that I didn't know what was going to happen when I chose to do what I did. The beauty of the game and what I'm trying to excel at is choosing what to do in a way that maximizes my chance to win, even though I know that sometimes choosing to do that is going to mean that I lose. I just can't tell which times I'll lose doing it and which times I'll win doing it. And I'm trying to make it so the times I win doing it are as large a proportion as possible. But there's no way that I'm ever going to make the times that I lose doing it be 0. It's very easy to come up with a seed in this game where, like, you play a class who can't beat Lagavulin as an early elite fight, you get 3 bad hallway fights, you get the spinning wheel event and get a curse put in your deck, then you have to fight Lagavulin with no potions and no cards which have improved your deck yet, and you lose. And a Nemesis player could lose that seed, and an optimal player will lose that seed. Both players will lose that seed. And it's easy to imagine that seed and think about it abstractly and stuff, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. It just doesn't have much relevance to playing the game in general and how it feels to play this game balanced as it is, and what it is to be an optimal player in this game, or to aspire to be a perfect human player in this game. So, hope you enjoyed this little chat about Nemesis and optimal players and perfect playing Slay the Spire. Enjoyed chatting with you, and I'll see you next time. If you don't know who I am, I'm Joe and Ribs. I run a Twitch.television channel, which is linked below the stream, and I play Slay the Spire like almost every day over there. So feel free to come hang out the first time you've seen me.